Hey, welcome to the Family Ministry Podcast. We have another great interview in store for you today. Before we jump into that interview, I want to tell you about Ministry Boost membership. Ministry Boost membership is an online platform to help you recruit more volunteers. Who doesn't need more volunteers? And build a thriving family ministry. It's over 50 courses and resources and ministry kits, done for you resources to help you fast forward the development in your ministry. I don't know if you're like me, but there's just not enough time in a week, in a day, in a month to always work on the ministry and help make it better and what we want it to be while we're working in it and getting ready for next Sunday or next Wednesday or whatever that might look like. So check out ministryboost.org and check out the membership where you get access to everything for one low monthly cost. If you have multiple staff at your church that would benefit, there's a price for that as well. And everybody gets to be part of it for one low price. Doesn't even cost as much as 2 users. So if you need to recruit more volunteers, which I think that's probably most of us, if you want to develop your family ministry, check out ministryboost.org. And then the other thing is the Family Ministry Roundtable. This is a new gathering that we're hosting in Dallas, Texas in November 5th and 6th for family ministry teams. So if you're a church where you want kids ministry and youth ministry to work together as one team, this gathering is for you. You're going to come together. We've got some great speakers going to talk about everything that's happening in family ministry, both big picture, like for all of us as one team, but also in preschool, in elementary, preteen, student ministry, next gen pastors, and even some specific topics within there. And then the thing I love the most about it and kind of the idea behind this whole concept is that it's a roundtable event. So we will spend time listening to experts talk about what's working in their church and what's working in their ministry. But you also have time hearing from other churches. What are they doing on the ground? How are you doing this? What is that document? Can I have it? Like, I feel like that's the strength of family ministries, is sharing that kind of information. I know our church has learned so much from other churches. And so I'm looking forward to the Family Ministry Roundtable. Check it out now to get the best price. And we hope to see you in November. Now let's jump in and listen to this week's episode of the podcast. Check out the show notes for all the links and everything else. Today we have Mutheu Esilaba on the podcast with us. Welcome. How are you doing?
What's up? I'm doing really well. It's gorgeous out. So that always makes my heart happy.
Mm-hmm. And so you can tell us about, a little bit about yourself and where you are so people know while it's gorgeous out, although who knows when they're listening to this, probably won't be gorgeous there anymore. It is beautiful here too in Maryland. But yes, tell us a little bit about you and your family and your church, and then we'll jump in.
All right. So my name is Mutheu, and that's a Kenyan name, Kamba, if you know Kenya, it's the Kamba tribe. And I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, but I live in Michigan. So it's the fall right now. I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but I don't think there's any more beautiful place in the whole world than Michigan in the fall. It's just gorgeous before we freeze in a couple of months.
Yes. It's got to be pretty before it freezes over. Yeah.
Yeah. So I serve at a church. I'm on the teaching team, and then I'm the family ministry director, which for us means I give a visionary and strategic leadership guidance to our kids and student pastors at 7 campuses. So we're in the Southeast Michigan area and have 7 campuses. And yeah, I've done that for a little under 2 years. Before that, I was in youth ministry for a long, long time, 20 something years. I'm not always working at a church. Sometimes I was a stay-at-home mom and I'm a small group leader, or serving in teaching or different capacities as a volunteer. But student ministry has been my heart for a long time. And more recently, it's just more generally, how do we disciple the next generation? How do we be faithful? Kind of thinking of a baton. We're holding a baton. How do we hand it off faithfully?
Yeah. Yes, and we're going to talk more about that. But just for some more context, you're at 242 Community Church in Brighton, Michigan. Is that right?
Yeah, that's where the central office
Kind
is.
of.
So that's the office out of, and you have to say 242, not 242.
242. Oh, that's true. That would make more sense. 242 in Brighton. I don't even know if I would know where Brighton, Michigan is if it wasn't for your church. But so where is that related to other places in Michigan that people would know?
I guess Ann Arbor is where one of our campuses is, and is more
Yes.
famous because
Okay.
of
Yep.
University
Yep.
of Michigan. Lansing is where another campus
Yes.
is, and
Okay.
that would be known because it's our capital.
Yes.
Then we have other campuses in different
If we paid
areas.
attention in geography in elementary school
Yeah, no,
we would
I
know
don't have any expectations because I don't know anything about Maryland. So,
that. No, you don't. No. What's the average attendance across all the campuses, and and what does like a typical student ministry look like at one of the campuses of 242?
so yeah, the average attendance right now is a little under 5,000 at all the campuses. And student ministry is in transition at our church for about a year. We've been trying a new model where we lean less on programming and more on small groups. So 3 times a month, the small groups are the biggest offering. And then once a month, we do something called one nights. So that's when we would do like traditional programming. So big worship team, speaker, and a shorter small group time. And it's designed to be more like event and like visitor oriented for kids to invite their friends. But even that, we're thinking as we talk about discipleship later, I can shed more light to that. We're rethinking how to reach Gen Z more effectively. And if the old school evangelism equals a Nerf gun battle is the best way.
Yeah, so we're gonna get to that, but the way I want to get there, because that was one of the conversations you and I had. Sometimes we, the podcast guests, we have conversations that I already had with that guest in a different form, which you and I talked about a month ago. We talked about this or so, and I thought, oh, we got to talk about this on the podcast because everybody would love to hear from this. But I wanted to talk about something we didn't talk about then, which is a little bit of your background, because that's all of us are shaped theologically by our background and upbringing. And so, tell me a little bit about like your church and faith experience in your home of Nairobi, Kenya, before moving here. And then we'll talk about here, and then we'll kind of get to this tension that I think exists in every church now.
Okay. I'm kind of going to share two parallel journeys. So my personal journey is my parents were strongly influenced by a revival in East Africa in the 30s to the 60s. There was an East African revival. My parents were sucked into it. And then we were born into a culture where you just love Jesus. That's what you do. So how I chose to start following Jesus, like personally, I remember being 9 years old and a guy coming to our house and asking me what my testimony was. And that was a culture of the revival. People would greet each other and say their testimony. And I was like, I don't know. I've just grown up in a Christian family. So I made something up. I lied. And my whole family was like, what? So they burst out laughing. I'm the baby. So I think they were like, that's super rich. So anyway, I end up talking to my mom and I'm like, I'm going to hell. I don't have a testimony. What's going on? And she was very gracious and didn't take anything for granted and unpacked the gospel for me as if I was hearing it for the first time. And it landed as if I was hearing it for the first time. And I remember feeling conviction and weeping as a 9-year-old and thinking, I want to serve Jesus the rest of my life. So that's how I came to faith. And then as a teenager, so this is another part of my story that's fascinating, but has influenced student ministry for me. My parents went to an old Anglican church, and now it has a super vibrant ministry to the next generation. But at that time, it didn't. So my parents found another church and released us to its student ministry as they continued going to their old school Anglican church. So it's fascinating to me now. Like, I can't imagine going to a different church than my kids because I have teenagers. But it was one of the best things my parents did for our faith. Like, we owned it on a whole other level. And like, so my student ministry experience was phenomenal. It was just so sweet to be known and loved in community. I think we experienced, so this was a Baptist church and we didn't talk about the Holy Spirit at all.
Sure.
But as a student ministry, we kind of discovered him by mistake, at camps and stuff. And we went on such a sweet journey of knowing who Jesus is in community. And it was so fun. We were running to Jesus together. So my desire to pour into the next generation comes from how sweetly I was poured into, if that makes any sense. I know there are many people who are like, oh my gosh, I didn't have this and I want to provide it for others. My story is I had such a sweet combination of inputs that I would love to do that for the next generation or for others. So that's kind of my story. My church background is kind of tied into that a little bit. So my parents, this Anglican church, we had to stay till confirmation and then go to the Baptist church. And in the middle, my parents went to a Pentecostal church.
Oh,
So
wow.
we would go to
Okay.
this Pentecostal church, they're shouting in tongues, and then we go to the
Uh-huh.
Anglican church and you're not allowed to clap. And then we go
Mm-hmm.
to the Baptist church. So I feel like I'm a denominational mutt.
Uh-huh.
All the things kind of came together to form how I see the world and how I know Jesus. And it's been fun. I think it then means I can be in different expressions of faith and worship and I don't get spooked or overwhelmed. I'm just like, okay, Jesus, where are you here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's a little bit of my story.
And then you came to the United States. What did church involvement look like initially there? Like, I know we're going to talk about the church you work at now. You were a youth pastor in another church, but initially, what was that like?
So the very first time we came was maybe 18 years ago. So my husband and I came as like a cross-cultural ministry experience program at our church in Nairobi. And I did middle school ministry. And our middle school ministry was 400 kids on a Tuesday night. Very interesting. I think about how
Mm-hmm.
much life has changed with sports and stuff.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was 400 kids and it was like a buzz of absolute chaos, but it was so fun. I feel like I would just stand in the middle and feel all the energy. So we had a great leadership team, adults who had been pouring into these kids faithfully for years. And that was my involvement for a year. Then we went back to Kenya. And then when we came back, my husband is who had the job and I couldn't work the way my visa status was. So I just volunteered in the student ministry. Actually, the first thing I did was teach at a women's event. They had like a teen track and I taught and it was awful. I was like not connecting with these kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I'm done in my calling student ministry. It was like a wall. So I didn't touch student ministry again for years. And then God used some actually painful things to bring me back to student ministry at our church. I was like trying to love the student ministry because they'd gone through a ton and they were like, hey, would you teach once a month? And then I fell back in love with it and got to know these kids and reconnected with student ministry culture. I guess I had been out of it for a while. But that's how I got back into student ministry and then ended up back on staff.
And what was, tell me a little bit, we didn't talk much about this before, but just from a curious nature, before coming to 242, you were a youth pastor at a previous church. And what was that church like? What was that context?
Yeah, so it was Elmbrook Church in Wisconsin, a very strong legacy church. So like 75 years old. Um, so the student ministry context, so it's the same church we were at 18 years ago. And I would say it was pretty like typical, like large group and then small groups, events once in a while, camps. So culture wise, it was very similar to 242, but I would say that at that time, it was probably smack in the attractional model. Like, um, I would get frustrated that small group, the whole of small group is highs and lows. And the last 10 minutes is like, oh yeah, Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not why we came. Like, I want to know how your week
Yeah.
was. If we can't anchor our faith into a reality, I don't know how we're helping you or discipling you. So that was true then. I don't know that that's true now. I left a really sweet, godly lady in charge, and I know she was pulling the ministry more towards the discipleship side. When I left 5 years ago, that's crazy. But yeah, I remember feeling the tension of that culture at that time.
Yeah. And that's the main thing I want to talk about. Cause when you and I were speaking a month ago or whenever that was, we were talking about that tension that you're wrestling with. I absolutely loved how you described it because you called it the sugar was like the fun. You called it the sugar, which is, I've probably told 30 people this story since then, by the way, just so you know, Mutheu. Um,
This is how I used to feel. I used to feel like unless there is brownies, we can't do Jesus. And I'm like, why? And there was a day actually, our someone on our team brought carrots just as a joke to the
oh,
like
that's
snack
the best.
table to see if
Yeah.
anyone would touch them. And the kids ate the carrots.
Yeah.
Anyway,
They'll
but
eat
yeah.
almost anything actually. So that, yeah, that does not a good gauge.
like mostly sugar with a sprinkle of Jesus, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's the tension is like, you know, sugar, fun on one side, attractional model, like that kind of thing, versus discipleship, Jesus. They are not mutually exclusive, but certainly churches fall somewhere in
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I've been working with a couple churches with Slingshot where I'm helping them hire youth pastors. And I would put those churches at different places on, if there is a continuum or a spectrum,
Yeah.
stylistically, I would put those churches in different places on that spectrum, and none of them are all Jesus and zero fun, or all
Yeah.
fun and zero Jesus. They're
Yeah.
somewhere, in a more balanced middle. It's just
Mhm.
which way do they lean? And so, what have you been wrestling with that 242, but also in your last church? Like, what are some of those tensions? It sounds like the last church, some of it was just time. We're spending far more time on the surface stuff and not
Yeah.
enough time. But what else has been a tension for you with this?
Yeah, I think somewhere along the line in this America, student ministry became like we replaced engagement for butts in seats. Like if kids are here, they're engaged. And discipleship, I don't know. I think we assumed small group is discipleship, but what's the content of the small group? How are the leaders running after Jesus and how are they modeling that? So there's so many dynamics. I think actually I remember my first week back on staff in student ministry at my old church. We had a fall event called Fall Palooza. And we went to one of the smaller campuses, had food trucks and what's that shooting thing where you like, I don't know what it's called, but laser
Oh,
gun.
laser tag. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, laser tag, and we did a movie and we had so much fun. It was like 5 hours, super fun event. And we didn't talk about Jesus one time. And I remember going home and thinking, how did this become student ministry? And I was imagining a student getting over their social anxiety and, okay, sure, I'll go to a church. And then they came and there was no Jesus. And I actually literally cried tears before God, just really grieving how this had become student ministry. And I had a really honest chat with my team. I mean, I was brand new, so I was like, I can't really yell at you. I want you guys to like me. So I'm like, okay, what was that? And as we processed, I think they all acknowledged, like, yeah, I don't know when this became what student ministry is. We want to be about Jesus, but we feel like this is how to draw a crowd. This is how to engage students. So I felt the tension probably since I went back to student ministry now 6, 7 years ago. I think that's evolved, and as I've gotten to know more of student ministry culture and like studied culture in America and understood students, I'm like, okay, I get it. I think it was a reaction to a bait and switch, like have some fun. Okay, here's the gospel in between you having So I think they were trying to be integrous, but at the same time gave up the wrong thing because only the gospel can transform lives. And that's our desire is for students to meet Jesus. Okay, let me fast forward to COVID. I think COVID was an acceleration of the tension where actually this shirt I'm wearing for weekend, we used to have a fall weekend event now at our church, and it was an attempt at a cheaper, shorter camp. So camp is super huge for us. We love camp culture. And at camp, you don't have those tensions of time. So you can do all the things. Let's have fun, eat the sugar, and talk about Jesus. We have 5 days.
Yep. You can do both of
So
all those things
fall
for 5 hours apiece.
yeah. So fall weekend for us was an attempt to like squish that into like a lock-in that's fun. But we would always err on the sugar. Like we would shove sugar down their throat and then be like, okay, now sit down, let's do chapel. And they're not there. They're like squirmy. So it was almost like we really wanted to disciple them, but we kept shooting ourselves in the foot because we would hype them up with this crazy game and it wouldn't necessarily speak to our next thing. Why was I talking about that? There was somewhere I was going. Oh yeah, how COVID accelerated the tension. So I think we'd been feeling out all this time, but during COVID, it became clear that we can't be about hype events and programming. That's not what we can be about. We have to get small and gather in small spaces, find safe communities. And that's what kids don't have. They can have fun online, they can play video games, they can find entertainment if that's what they're looking for. What they don't have is authentic community, people who see them and love them and they can be real with. So it became very clear that that's our core offering as the church and as a youth ministry. And coming out of COVID, I was feeling I don't think programming is the solution in terms of how to create the environment we're looking for. When I say programming, I don't mean a lack of intentionality. I mean big smoke machine,
Yeah.
lights,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. How do we create meaningful, like a warm environment? So we started changing setup. We would do couches instead of the lights being like stage, we would have like warm lighting. So our production team really worked hard. So it's still production, but at different value. And it still wasn't quite landing. I was just like trying to figure this out. Then the Gen Z data came out and it was like Gen Z love Jesus, but they don't really know him. They are open to the Bible, but they don't know what it says. And the kids who would call themselves Christians have very, very light understanding of what that means. And I was like, yeah, that's our kids. I could see how that could happen in our church. So I think we started this journey of, okay, let's wait towards small groups and make discipleship the core thing. And even on that journey, then audit what our small groups are and whether that is actually helping our kids know Jesus more. So that's some of the journey we've been on.
Do you? I'm reminded my book's right here. Remember when we last spoke? You were
Yes,
talking about this book,
yes,
which if people are
yes.
listening and not watching, they can't see what I'm holding. But it's the Open Generation book from Barna, How Teens Around the
Mhm.
World Relate to Jesus, Volume 1. And you had mentioned that, and I was like, you know what? I do think I've read that, and then dug it out of a bookshelf over here or whatever. What has you talked a little bit about this generally, but like, what changes have you made, if any, from 3 years ago to now, to maybe shift on that spectrum from less sugar to more Jesus in the balance? Like, what does that look like practically? Because, and I do want to talk about your team too, like we talked about, and you talked a little bit about here, how they're wrestling through it. And sometimes if that's all see, you're bringing, and this is part of what I didn't ask, but I wanted to get at, how much of it is your experience in Kenya and where was that on the spectrum versus what you experienced here? And I feel like what you're looking for is like, how do I find the right balance of those two things? Or just what was in Kenya, bring that here. Like, how much of it is your background? Then maybe we can get to like what you've changed.
Yeah, that's a deep question for me because I think when I first came, everything was new, culture shock. Now, when I came with my 3 children more recently, indefinitely, and I did feel the temptation to assimilate, like just become American and conform. And, I've always been in large white churches. That's where God has ended up calling us. And then the tensions of like, wait, but I don't see a holy God. I see a lot of like, grace, 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 come as you are. But obviously in our culture, like we really revere God. It doesn't mean we don't feel loved by him, but in a sense, like the God in Africa, like you don't mess with him. You don't like keep sinning and be like, we're
Sure.
still boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
You confess your sin and like it's a high church culture. There's a holiness that is important. So I was wrestling with that even at the beginning when I was like, okay, yeah, grace. I can have more grace. And it was really good for me. I think going global, if you're American, you go somewhere else, or you're from somewhere else and you come here, like we see a different angle of God and we grow in our faith because we're forced to practice spiritual disciplines that are different, or people need God a different way in different places, so you experience him differently. So that was really good for me initially. Then I started swinging back, like, no, but God is holy. I feel like our holy God has been hidden, and that's half the gospel, to be like, well, come as you are, come as you are. Okay, and then like if you don't say this part of like, okay, sin no more and God wants more for you, you're not going to be all God wants you to be if you're stuck in sexual sin. That's not the gospel. So I think I'd always carried that as a Kenyan living here. And then I had an encounter with God where I was praying for him to show up how I've seen him in Kenya. And he was like, no, I want to show up how I'm working in Wisconsin right now. I want to show up how I'm working in Michigan right now. Like God is at work here now. And I believe he's calling Gen Z to himself in powerful ways. I believe he's on the move. And I'm watching them respond to very clear, no, don't mess with the gospel, just like present it. And a marker of this revival that I'm watching is confession. Like I acknowledge my sin and I don't want to sin anymore, you know? So I'm watching that, and I think it's a key part of what God wants to do. Where the attractional church model, we wanted to do PR for Jesus. So therefore, if he said hard things, we'd be like, we'll just leave that verse out. I think Gen Z is hungry for that. Like, give it to us how it is. And I'm watching them respond to that. And it's not like beat you over the head with the Bible. We're not going back to the 50s or whatever. I think it's just like a godly, kind call to something higher and transcendent. And I think they're already feeling that. That's what the open generation is. They're open to that there is something bigger than myself and I'm looking for it. And I'm watching my kids' friends live this out. Like I read it in the data, we changed our model, and then I'm watching these kids start coming to our church and call my husband and ask him deep theological questions. So going back to one nights for us strategically are for inviting new kids. Well, new kids are not looking for a nerf battle. They're asking spiritual questions. So is an event what I want to offer them, or a space where they can feel safe to be like, dude, I don't know the Bible. And you guys did this weird thing called communion. Like, explain that to me, you know? So yeah, we're wrestling with those things. And like you said, I think we didn't hire for this. We hired for, can you run a program? So we're in tension with some of our staff, and some of our staff are like, yes, I see it. I've wrestled through it as we went through COVID and I'm there, you know? But yeah.
What you mentioned, Gen Z kids are like, give that to me. In other words, like, tell me the truth or the hard truth or the thing that might be um, complicated or controversial or whatever. How are you seeing that play out in a world too where most Gen Z, Gen Alpha kids are exposed to a lot of the opposite? So, like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we live in a culture, and maybe this is more political than theological, but
Yeah.
a lot of people really just want more of what they already believe. You know what I mean? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? With adults, not necessarily kids and teenagers, but with adults. And so how are you seeing that with teens as you're talking about the hard things? And I would imagine a lot of what you're talking about is very different than what they're hearing from their friend at school or their teacher at school or whatever. I mean, churches, that's a common conversation now. So how are they wrestling with that? Tell me that, and still come back. Because I think a lot of people would think, oh, there's not even going to come anymore if we say things they really don't like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've found the opposite. Now, I have to be honest that I'm not finding them. I don't yet know that we're doing that well as a student ministry. But our church in general on Sunday morning has talked about some hard things over the last year. And I'm watching these kids lean in instead of get disgusted. We just went through a very public moral failure, and that Sunday was different. Our lead pastor came and was super vulnerable about how broken he was. And then the head of our leadership team, what other people would call elders, had us all kneel and pray for our church. And I was watching these two boys who are unchurched. Their families do not go to church. They've become curious about the Lord. They've been coming for maybe 6 weeks. And I'm watching them thinking, what are they hearing? What are they seeing? Are they disillusioned? And they came back the very next Sunday and the next Sunday and the next one. So they don't seem put off by hard conversations. They almost seem attracted by vulnerable hard conversations. And I think our posture has been, hey, we haven't figured this all out, but it's too important not to talk about. it hasn't been like, here's what you should believe. I think the posture of our team has been very like, we're wading in and we have an anxious stomachache, but we're going to have this conversation because it's important and we love you guys and care about you. So yeah, I'm seeing them lean in. I'm seeing them ask questions. I think, like you said, adults may have already formed in their opinion, and we live in very tribal times. Echo chambers are what's safe. But kids haven't, and they're watching the dysfunction of our generation and thinking there has to be another way, you know? So I think like my kids push me back when I want to stay in an echo chamber. They're like, no, you know, they're Gen Z kids who are like, no, you will not make that assumption about everybody who drives an F-150 truck, you know? And I'm like, okay, they're calling us out. And I think that's really good for us as a culture. And I've apologized many times to students. I'm like, I'm so sorry. My generation has lost their minds, especially on the internet. And please be better than us.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So yeah, I would agree. It makes sense. 100 makes complete sense. I think most youth ministry leaders would agree that students want what's real. That's been true for a long time.
Mhm.
So it makes sense that they would be drawn to what's real, what's not. I mean, even especially in the world of social media where a lot of
Mhm.
that isn't real, or at least it's not the
Yeah.
full picture. So then when they can experience something real, that makes a ton of sense. And just for clarity for people listening too, your pastor did not have a moral failure. He was heartbroken because somebody else on the team had that. Just
Yes.
though,
Yes.
just as they listen, they don't
Thank
necessarily
you.
think that.
Yes.
But
Someone.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of thing that'll bring. I mean, it makes everything more real because now it's a hard thing that the church is wrestling with, and
Yeah.
people are praying about. And here, these students get to see. I mean, it's almost like, hey, come to our church on the worst Sunday.
Yes.
See a dark side of the reality of people, and humans and what we do. And then they came back, which is a great thing. Let's talk about the tension too with your team. You mentioned a little bit about this, but like you said, some of them were hired to run a program. So they were hired under a different model or whatever, and so now they're wrestling with you on this tension and what do we need to change and adapt. Like, how's that going? Or some of them, I mean, this is a public podcast so they can listen to it, so it's kind of funny, but I just want to know, it's different like when this is something you're wrestling with and now you're leading the team through it. It's different for somebody else who's on the team and now they're trying to come along with you. Maybe they
Mhm.
agree completely, maybe they don't. So, like, how's that going? And what's that looking like in the student ministry at different campuses too? That's the other thing. It's not even like one campus, one student
Yeah.
ministry. It's different campuses where it could look a little different.
It's going great. My team is doing amazing. This is for the PR part. Anyway,
Yes. Yeah. Is this PR Jesus? You just gave us PR Jesus. I can
I
see the sugar.
I think that we have such a new team. So like when there's a certain group of us that went on the journey of trying to do COVID ministry and then coming out on the other side, and some things were really clarified for us about what we value. And I think the people who went through that journey and couldn't make that transition are not on our team anymore. Then we have a whole new bunch of that not everybody who left didn't make that transition. I need to reframe that. But the
Yeah.
people who did struggle aren't there anymore. The
Yeah.
others were doing a great job and just like life moved for,
Yeah.
spouses, jobs and stuff. So we happen to have a whole new team right now. And my rallying cry, the drum I've been beating for my team is the most important thing about your job is your relationship with Jesus, because we are in a season where I think listening to him and to Gen Z is going to be the most strategic thing about student ministry, because God is at work in unique ways that I've never seen before. This summer felt like the answer to many prayers and lots of fasting. Like when we went to camp, there's camp hype. And then there's what happened this summer. It felt like this college age revival I've been watching finally jumped into like high school. And there
Mm-hmm.
was abandon in worship and kids putting up their hands to say, I want to serve the Lord with my whole life. I want to go back to my church and start our prayer ministry. It's not like kids getting excited about student ministry. It's them rising to take their place in the church. And my biggest fear is that they will come back to student ministry and go back to be a consumer and fall back spiritually asleep. That's my biggest fear. And I've told my team that I think like we need to give them keys, give them meaningful parts of the ministry. It's not like, are we entertaining you enough? It's like, no, come and pray, come and preach, pray over each other, have a significant role in what it means for us to be church. And not just in student ministry, like lead on our adult worship team or our church worship team, be on the parking team at our church, like be in kids ministry, all of it. So that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like the kids have stood up and said, I want more of Jesus and I want more in my role at the church. And our temptation is to go back to, oh, how do we entertain you? You know? So I think there are some of our team is there. They are listening, they're eager, they're running, they're modeling for us other ways to do this. We came back from a mission trip and one of our students went back to her campus and her campus student pastor was ready for her, like had her lead an alpha at her school. She's mobilized to be on mission. And then he had a tangible next step for her to be on mission in her community. So I'm watching some student pastors get it and run. And then I'm watching student pastors who we hired from the attraction of church model background. And it's a huge struggle to make that transition. Just from a vision perspective, I think it's just like, I don't see how something else could work. So even if we're trying a new model, like I'm still hearing events that sound like the past. I'm like, you know what? I'm not anti-fun. I know that I got that PR. I really like fun. It just needs to be in its place. And I think you can have so much fun running after Jesus.
Yes. And you, again, you're not, it's like you said, you're not going from all fun to zero fun. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, whatever percent to less and more about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does just come down to the time spent and the conversations had and all of those kinds of things. And I love that we're talking about it now because I feel like, this isn't like you're there and there's a bow on it and you've arrived and this is what you want. You're like in the messy middle of this transition. And of course with student ministry, even if you get it to where you want it to, you still need another 10 years to see how well it works,
Yeah.
in the long run in the lives of students. But I mean, you'll have some initial things that'll tell you, how well it's working or not working. And, but I think I'm glad you were up for having this conversation on the podcast because I feel like what I told you before, I'll say again, which is probably half of next gen leaders are wrestling with this and the other half should be, even if they're not. You know what I mean? And so even if they aren't, it's something they would hear this and think, oh yes, we need to talk about that too. What does that look like? Where are we on the sugar scale, as I'm going to call it? Are we full Sour Patch Kids or are we, something else? I don't know. I could play that analogy out plenty of ways, but so I think it's just helpful. And I like that we're talking about it here in that middle where it's like, it's not resolved and you haven't figured it out and you haven't been running this play for 5 years or whatever, and then we can talk again and keep talking about it in different conversations. So that's helpful. Cool. Well, anything else you would add before we wrap up that you would want to say or that you all are dealing with or you're seeing?
Yeah. I think the conviction I feel about Gen Z is very real for Gen Alpha. And I actually think I was with the CIY president, Jason French, and I'm going to quote him saying, because I was telling him how camp was for us, because we go to CIY, Christ in Youth. It's an organization that does camp. They didn't pay me. You're welcome. But I was telling him how I'm like, camp was incredible. I saw Gen Z rise and take their place. And he's like, Gen Alpha will blow them out of the water. And I can see that even in my house. My 9-year-old, how he prays, how he knows God, his boldness in sharing faith at school. I think the data is that Gen Alpha will be the most evangelistic generation in 20 years. So I think as we're talking about, I think in student ministry is like a cat. Like it takes a lot to like please students and they're so cool. And kids ministry is like a puppy. It's like, they're just happy to be. So I think we're forced to audit things in student ministry before we are in kids ministry because they're just happy. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be had across family ministries. And I've been on a journey because now I'm the family ministry director and I knew kids ministry less. So I've been on a journey of, who's crushing it in kids ministry and what are they doing? And honestly, a ton of American kids ministries looked the same, like
Yeah.
balloons and colors. And then I started like pulling threads to the UK and post-Christian environments and they're not playing about discipleship because they're like, this is a dying breed, Christians.
Yeah.
So if you are going to be a Christian, it's not like a cool thing. And as an
Mm.
8-year-old, we're going to teach you to be a missionary in your school. It's not a luxury,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're going to teach you how to pray, like really pray, because you need that Jesus, a big one. And I would argue our kids need a big God. They're going through heavy things. Families are falling apart. So a pocket-sized Jesus, which is what I think the attractional church model ends up with, is not serving the next generation. It's not
Mm.
serving the next generation.
I like your cat puppy analogy. I'm going to have to use that in the future. The cat thing, it's like, yeah, I could totally see that. Teenagers
Yeah,
could be hard to wrangle and who knows where they are and scratch your eye
yeah.
out and who knows what else.
And like,
And the pup.
but I'm not going to show you.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Mhm.
That's a great analogy. That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking time to talk about this in this format while you're in the middle of wrestling with it. And thanks for what you're doing there at the church and to lead this and to kind of wrestle with the tension and deal with the hard changes that have to be made to move a different direction. How can people connect with you or if they want to follow or have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, I have been off social media for a while, so I'm not going to give the social media things. I might not see it. So I'll just give my church email, Mutheu, Mutheu.Esilaba at 242community.com. That's how they can get in touch with me.
All right, there you go. Thank you again for doing this, and
Thanks
I
for
really
having me.
appreciate it. We'll talk again soon, especially like maybe a few years from now, and touch base again. It's like, okay, how's it
Yeah,
going now?
for
Where are you?
scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's the sugar scale? Yep, gotta measure that. I'm gonna see where that is. We'll check
Maybe
back
what
in.
what the blog is called or the book. We'll see. The sugar
That's
scale.
right. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Check out the show notes for all the links and notes and resources. And don't forget to sign up for the Family Ministry Roundtable happening this fall, November 5th and 6th in Dallas. It's designed for family ministry teams. So bring your kids staff, youth ministry staff, whether that's you and the kids pastor, you and the student pastor, or maybe you have a larger team with multiple staff in different areas. The Family Ministry Roundtable was designed for you to come and learn from top next gen voices and other churches, and we want to learn from your church. So we hope to see you there. Register now to get the best price and check out Ministry Boost membership for you and your staff. It could be for your entire church staff. If you need to recruit more volunteers, train volunteers, implement volunteer coaches, work on different areas of your ministry, the Ministry Boost membership gives you access to everything we have, over 50 courses, resources, bundles, ministry kits, things like that you can use so you don't have to start from scratch as you develop your ministry. Check out ministryboost.org/membership, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.